Hello. In this video, I will be defining what a monopoly is and how to identify it. So none of those learning outcomes actually included here. So what is a monopoly? A monopoly is a single company that controls 100% of a specific market. So by definition, it's an imperfect competition or the opposite of perfect competition because it allows for no competition at all. Monopolies control the entire supply of a given product. So an easy example is Apple. If I want to buy an Apple product, then I have to buy it from the Apple company, at least a new one. So Apple has an entire monopoly over its product. So compared to the perfect competition when there are multiple thousands of suppliers and companies in the industry that compete for the customer's money and attention, a monopoly is not the case at all. So monopolies, however, are really, really rare when you are talking about an industry as a whole. For example, the computer industry or the cell phone industry, there's no single monopoly. Apple does not have a monopoly of cell phone. I don't own an Apple cell phone, but I own a cell phone, a smartphone. However, what we observe is monopolistic market. So a monopolistic market, it's a market in which there's a strong concentration. And so in some cases, we may observe that monopolistic competitors, so competitors that sell products in a quasi-monopolistic market, actually have very limited differentiated products sometimes, and definitely the prices are not that far from each other. And in most cases, those prices will tend to be higher than what we have expected if we're dealing with a perfectly competitive market. So how do we identify high concentrations or quasi-monopolies? We look at the concentration ratio. So marketing researchers developed this ratio, and it says that actually includes the four largest companies that operate in a given market, in a given industry. So household laundry equipment, for example, is an industry, and the four largest companies that sell household laundry equipment, washing machine and dryers, control 98% of that market. So there's more or less 98% chance that if you want to buy a clothes dryer, you have only the option between four companies, even if you apparently have the option between multiple brands, because one company may own multiple brands. It's certainly true for cereal breakfast. We have a multiplicity of brands, but in actuality, only four or less dominant companies. Now, one caveat with this is like the automobile company and maybe industry and some other industries, because this ratio takes into account cars that are produced and sold in the US, and so imported cars are not included. And so in actuality, the automobile industry maybe is less concentrated than it appears to be. Now let's review a little bit what we talked about in chapter 4. So here we have the demand function, and the demand function it describes consumers' willingness and ability to pay for a good. So when the price is good, then they decide that they want to participate in this market. So obviously, if you have a price, the fewer consumers are willing. They may be able, but not willing to get into that market. For example, recently, due to the shortage of chips, computer chips, there has been a reduction in the supply of new and, as a result, used cars. And so the price has gone up. But at one point, there has been a number of consumers that refused to participate to enter this market when the price was so high. So when demand decreased, right, and the price decreased with it. And so we found ourselves in a situation where we have a supply here and demand was high, but then consumers say, well, those prices are too high, I cannot pay this much. And so that caused the price to decrease temporarily. What actually happened in that market is that supply, further decreased. Over the past few months, supply further decreased, and so the price either remain the same or is it actually continue to increase. The reality is that the price continue to increase. After a few months, consumers withdrew from the market. Well, they needed a car, they found a new job, etc. And so we move again in that direction, and demand increased a little bit. That caused the price of used cars, to continue to increase. On average, the price of new car also increased, and that has been happening over the past 6-7 months. So, as a review graphically, in a perfectly competitive market, there's only one price. PX is the market price. Now, how is that market price determined? That market price determined is primarily dependent on demand. That's why we believe that at least the school of economics that I adhere to believe that we have a demand-driven economy. So consumers are still king, and we see that. Even though most of the markets are not perfect competitive markets, usually there's some degree of competition. And so it's the quantities that consumers are willing and able to want at a given point, given the price that are offered, that will determine the actual price. So the marginal cost, is the supply curve. Is a supply curve, and so because it's the producers are going to sell, they can sell is given a product, a car, for example, at many different prices. But what determines the production cost, so the additional cost for producing one more item. So when the price of producing one more item increases, when all other items that exist are produced at that price. And so typically what causes the cost of a goods to increase when production is increasing? All this happens in relatively short terms. We are not dealing with long term here in our model, because in the long term everything changes and adjustments are continued. But in relatively short term, if the supply available to produce a quantity of of X1, if producers, if there's supply available, if producer, almost overnight want to increase that quantity, they need to buy more input. Well, the input available usually are not sufficient to or immediately in large enough quantity for all the suppliers to put their hand into it. And so what happens is that the price of input will tend to increase. In the long run, there will be adjustment down the supply chain, but not in the short run. Okay, so things don't change that easily. So, for example, right now, there's a shortage of shipping containers. Well, the price of shipping increase and will remain relatively high until the adjustment is done. And so, for those who want to ship more, the company want to ship more, they have to pay for higher shipping, higher price for renting the containers, and their price will increase. And so, if it costs P1, okay, to produce quantity 1 x1, well, it might be that, and let's say this is 20, yeah, it might be that, well, at price P1, there are more, okay, than 20 people who want to buy a particular product. And because if more consumers are willing to pay for a product, okay, at there's X3 number of consumers who are willing to pay for a product when price is 16, right? So suppliers will always respond. And so that's the supply curve. So the market price is going to be 16. So market price is primarily dependent on the number of consumers who are willing to pay for a product. That's the value they put on the product. When that number is determined and the willingness to pay for that product is determined, then supply will adjust. Once supply adjusts for a short period of time, that will be the market supply price, because there are multiple suppliers that are working hard to meet that demand. Okay, and so that's why usually we think about demand, because we think about consumers. So in this particular example here, we assume that all that being said, right? Okay, quantity demanded, okay, for this wiggle here, it's 7,000, right? So the demand for this product, so there are 7,000 consumers who are willing to pay for this product, and they are willing to pay $14. Okay, so they are willing to pay. So we depart with that information. It's not an information that is built in over time. Of course, it's built to a certain point, and we are at that point where, well, that's where we are. And so, given the number of consumers who are willing to pay $14, well, supplier will say, well, okay, how much or how many product can we produce at this price? And so they go and do the math and start producing, try to meet the demand of 7,000, right? And so they figured out that if they want to sell 7,000, right, their cost of production is going to be 14. Okay, and so first we have a number of people who want to buy. We know that what their willingness to pay is really the demand curve. Okay, and then supply adjusts to that. All right, so in this example here, then, okay, to produce 14, to produce actually 7,000 units, okay, the production cost, the marginal cost, the cost of producing the last unit is 14. So that's going to be the market price. And so there are 7,000 consumers who are willing to pay for that much. So that price is fixed for a period of time. Might be a few hours, a few days, a few weeks, a few months, and sometimes a few years. So here we have the total cost of producing, okay, is 63, and the revenue is 14. Now it is 84. So in that industry, the total profit available for everybody to share is 21. Okay, so now the marginal revenue, what is it? Okay, the marginal revenue says that is a revenue that producer supplier can obtain for selling one more unit. Okay, because the price is fixed, then that revenue is going to be fixed. Graphically, that's what we have. Okay, we may start over here, right? The price is 10, and then there could be a pressure on demand. Okay, so here, when you are here, then this will be the demand, right? For price of 10, this will be, I'll call it the D3 for demand for producing on 3,000 units, right? Okay, but then consumers actually obviously want more, and so, well, they want more. This is how many consumers are want to pay, want to buy the products, and so, you know, if supplier are asked to produce 7,000, right, they'll say, well, okay, to produce this much, this is our cost, right? And so we look at the cost, and then we have the market price. So the market price is that's how it's determined. Now, what you will looking at and pay attention to is that when we have the situation of a monopolistic, which I will talk about in more detail in the next video, okay, the revenue, okay, the price scheme, okay, is completely different. We don't have a fixed price anymore because the monopolist, okay, own the demand curve. So it's really sit on that demand because it's a single one demand curve. There's no competitions. There are not multiple producers. So the monopolist will determine the price. Where there's only one price at one given point for in a perfectly competitive market. In the monopolistic markets, there will be multiple price options. We'll talk about it next.